teaching the lifts to beginners and novices, this is a question I was asked, and so I'm going to do a video explaining exactly how I approach this process. My answer is probably going to be underwhelming, though, because a lot of people out there have videos on, how they have this specific methodology and all this stuff like that. Well, I've been coaching for 25 years now, and I would tell you that I did things very differently in the beginning, and now I do. It seems like I'm doing much less. Like, you would almost think that I'm lazy and that I don't know what I'm doing because I do so little now. So in the beginning, let me just back up and tell you how I did it originally, and it was wrong. I would give people like a million cues. I would tell people, like, put your feet here and point your toes out like this and do this and do this and do this. And now, as you descend, make sure that you're doing this and focus on this and, keep this brace. And, that's not a very good way to teach people, actually. So I have this phrase that I say all the time. And I just, it's not like grammatically correct, but let athletes be athlete. Or let athletes be athletes. It's allow your athlete to be athletic. Allow people to move, right? So let's just take something as simple as the squat, okay? And the squat is not simple, actually. It's very technical, especially like if you get into the higher levels, you start realizing how technical the squat is. But for an absolute beginner, we're just going to take a barbell, okay? And we're going to squat down and stand back up with it, right? So this is like the most simple version of a squat ever. We're not looking for a powerlifting style squat or, some Olympic weightlifting style squat. We just want the most basic thing ever. My approach is entirely focused on the setup and start positions. And actually that applies to everything. If you start in the right position, so you have the bar properly placed on your back, your feet are properly spaced, your feet are properly planted, and you have the correct start position, the rest of the movement goes smooth. I mean, it literally just comes down to, unlock your knees and hips at the same time and descend. The problem that you'll see, and this happens even in high-level lifters, I feel like it was Ed Cohn that talked about how the time that he injured his knee, he knew as soon as he started his descent that he was out of position. Now, Ed Cohn is squatting this massive amount of weight whenever that occurs, right? You're probably not going to blow your knee out with, 45 pounds because, the strength of your connective tissue exceeds 45 pounds. However, I think you can learn something very valuable from that. And that is the fact that Ed, points out that the moment he started his descent, he knew he was out of position, but he couldn't correct it. Your start position is everything. And so, like, the same thing happens with the deadlift. If you have a bad start position, you're not going to correct it once you start moving. So the thing that I focus on with beginners is really truly the setup and the start position, whether it's, a deadlift or a squat or a bench press, snatches and cleans even. I really focus on the start position and, how do you set up for this movement? I wish I had, the ability to make a fancy video where I, coach 10 different people through the squat and coach 10 different people through the deadlift and, 10 different people through the bench press so you could see how the process is done. But it really is exactly what I just said. I focus on the setup. So if you think about things from the most simple standpoint, okay, we already all know how to squat because you sit down and you stand back up. I mean, how many times do you sit on a chair? You sit on a toilet, whatever it is, you've squatted down to pick something up. You've squatted down to, in life, you just, like, this is a natural movement. I squat down to put something in the bottom drawer of the refrigerator, right? What's different about having a barbell? Well, now you have a load that is, placed onto your back. So you have this axial load, so you have to stay in alignment now. You can't just, like, round your back. You can't just, just drop down, okay? And so if you think about this, if we get into a proper position and the bar is properly placed on the spine and we have our hands in place and now we're going to brace properly, once you lock that brace in, okay, all we're doing is just unlocking the knees and the hips, and you're going to allow yourself to descend. As long as I'm going to use the word trunk, because I don't like the word core. Core tends to be abs. People think of abs when you say core, but this is all the same thing. Torso. As long as your torso, trunk, whatever, stays stable, your legs won't have any problem pushing 45 pounds back up, okay? And mind you, we're going to get stronger over time. We're eventually going to put, 135, 225, 315 on that bar. But when you're initially teaching the movement, I have yet to come across a beginner who doesn't have 45 pounds of strength. These are healthy individuals. I could tell you the story about myself when I couldn't do an air squat, but that's a different story. The thing is here, as long as your torso, trunk, etc. stays in alignment, your legs have no problem going down and coming back up. Now, I'm going to share something with you, and I don't care about whatever weird hang-ups people have, personality issues, politics, etc. Starting strength, Mark Ripito, he has probably coached more squats than anyone in the entire world. And if you watch his videos of how to coach a squat, I don't think you can do anything better than that. Now, is that the ideal squat for everyone? No. Is that the ideal squat to optimally lift the most weight possible for your powerlifting total? No. But will it work for novice level lifters? Yes. And the reality of the situation is no different than the snatch or the clean even. You start off with a certain form technique that allows you to perform the lift. And as you become more advanced, you make refinements to your lift. So, like I could even give you the example of like looking at my front squat. I used to squat with a very, very narrow stance and a very narrow hand placement. And I realized that this is not mimicking or matching my hand placement or my foot placement whenever I perform cleans. So whenever I would front squat, I would take a very narrow grip and I would take a very narrow stance. And I realized that, hey, when I clean, my feet are actually moving out to the sides. And also when I clean, I have to take a slightly wider grip because I have very long arms. So for me to hit the power position properly and not just come off my knee, I have to take a wider grip on the bar so it comes off my thigh. I changed my grip and my stance in my front squat over time. This wasn't like something where someone told me to do this either. It was just something that you eventually work towards. The same thing is true for my back squat. People initially told me, want your hands in as close as possible and all this stuff like that. And I realized that for me to get a good rack position in my back that supports the bar, I actually need to put my hands slightly wider because I'm very small. I have very small bones. I have a very small frame. So if you look at someone like Sebastian Orb, he's a big dude. He tries to get his hands in as close as possible, and his hands are still pretty far out. I can get my hands in so close that they're touching my delts. That's actually too close. So I'm hypermobile. And so I realized that what I need to do is actually try to make myself as big as possible when I get underneath the bar. But that took years for me to arrive at that. The original stance and the original close grip, that was good enough. Like I wasn't going to get injured performing that way. But it wasn't the optimal form for me to put the most weight on the bar, if that makes sense, right? So you're gonna change your form over time. But when coaching beginners, like I said, starting strength is a fantastic resource. I don't care how people feel about Mark Ripito. This is not a video about Mark and his politics or his opinions or his sense of humor or anything like that. I'm just as objectively as possible stating his method for teaching the squat is a very straightforward and direct method for teaching the squat. Same thing for the deadlift, same thing for the bench press. It is the most simple and straightforward way to get someone started. This is not elite level, but this is going to help literally anyone who's just starting out That is the most easy way for you to teach the squat. Now, whenever I teach the deadlift, the same thing applies. So I'm not going to go through the deadlift the same way I went through the squat. But essentially, again, what I'm looking for is getting people into the correct start position. So if the bar is too far forward, okay, it's way out by your toes or something, we already know that now we've extended the lever, right? And so this is not a good position, because as soon as people start to pull their back rounds, if the bar is actually in too close, okay, you're not going to be able to get your hips into an optimal position, all right? And so now, actually, again, the back will round because you're going to shoot your hip. So what you're looking for whenever you're teaching the deadlift again is you're looking for this position, and everyone's going to be slightly different because we all have slightly different limb lengths. But you're going to find this position where the back is nice and flat and straight, right? The femur is above a 90-degree angle. This is not a squatted deadlift. This is a deadlift. It's a hip hinge. And some people may be higher or lower depending on their limb lengths. And the shin should be slightly forward, not perfectly vertical, but also not aggressively forward. Like, we're not going to start a deadlift where our knee is way out in front of our toe, okay? And once I get people into that start position, it really is just push the floor away. That's the cue. Push the floor away. I don't tell people to stand up. When people stand up, they let their shoulders round, and you'll see a lot of errors made. It's push the floor away. The same thing is true of the squat, actually, as I want people to think about pushing the floor down. So instead of you thinking about like stand back up, you're going to push into the floor. Same thing for the deadlift, push into the floor. Now, the bench press being different, obviously, because we're laying down. And with the bench press, I find that the biggest factor is actually grip width. If I can find the right grip width for people, their elbows and their shoulders move in the proper form. So, if you take too wide of a grip, people will flare their elbows and they'll be too high up, and that'll put a lot of stress on the shoulder joint. You take too narrow of a grip, and people, I think there's less risk of injury with a close grip bench press, and just in general. But now people are going to come down and they're going to lower the bar into like their belly or their sternum, which is not incorrect, but you're not going to get a lot of pec drive, a lot of pec tension with that, the same way that you would with a slightly wider grip, and so you lose some strength on that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but realizing that we're getting a different stimulus here, it's not optimal, if you will, for moving the most amount of weight. The other thing is that I never push people into a position where they're uncomfortable. So I want your arch to be comfortable. I don't want extreme arches. I don't teach that. And also the leg drive part. Some people may find that they bench press more comfortably with their foot flat, and some people find they bench press more comfortably, pushing with the ball of the foot and the heel is actually off. Either one is completely fine with me. What's more important to me is that the person is in a position where they're not uncomfortable in their start position. And so we want that bar path to be as straight as possible up and down. And that's actually true of all of these movements. If I could have an optimal squat, the bar itself moves straight up and down, the deadlift moves straight up and down, the bench press moves straight up and down. And so what I have arrived at this point in time is I give fewer cues and I spend more time on the start. So if we can get your start position and your setup position correct, the rest of the movement usually takes care of itself. And that really is the truth of this. Even like if you look at something very high level, like snatches and cleans at the Olympic level, the start position is everything. If you look at the jerk, the start position is everything. Push presses. I mean, take any complex movement. The start position is so critically important. And so that's what I actually focus on now. Instead of giving people a million cues like, as you descend, make sure you push your knees out. And, as you descend, think about where your pelvis is in space and, push through your big toe and externally rotate and, push the floor apart. And no, I spend less time on all that stuff. I get people into a proper start position, and then it's just like, go. And If they make the same error repeatedly, that's when you start making cues and making corrections, okay? This is one of the things I've pointed out all the time about Olympic weightlifting. When people are starting Olympic weightlifting, they make a different error every time that they do a repetition. There's no sense in you doing corrective exercises. They're making different errors every time. Now, when people start making the same error every time, that's the point in time where you can start making corrective, interventions, right? So this lifter jumps forward sometimes, jumps backwards sometimes shorts their pulls, sometimes pulls too early and pulls too late, and all these things like that. Okay, if they're making different errors every time, what am I going to do? Like 1,000 different corrective exercises? They're not even consistent. Once they're consistently making the same error, though, every single time this person pulls too early, every single time this person does XYZ, now is the time where you start implementing the corrective things. Because if you're making the same error consistently, now we know where the weakness is. If you're making a different error every time, I mean, you're just throwing darts in the dark. Like, maybe you do need this corrective exercise, but maybe you don't. Maybe you were just out of position, or, so, like, I think it was Dan John who made this comment, repetition is the best coach. And that really is how I treat things. I start people off with really focusing on their start position, and then I just let them do repetitions until they feel comfortable with the movement. And only after they've done enough repetitions that they're making the same error every time, only at that point in time do I intervene on any type of correction. I have learned, even in sprinting, whatever it is, say less. You can overcoach people very, very fast. And if you overcoach people, there's too much to think about. These things happen relatively fast. Even a squat is relatively fast. It's only a couple seconds. How many things can you think about? A snatch, a clean, sprinting, etc. All these things happen at relatively short time intervals. So repetition helps. And then only at some point in time do you say something that is corrective. And that is how I have taken my coaching over time. I used to be that person who was like, biomechanics, we got to get all this stuff perfect. No. After 25 years, I say less, and I try to give people as few cues as possible. In fact, actually, my goal is if you're making some error, I want to give you one single cue. And that is actually the art of coaching. You know that you're a good coach whenever you can give a person a single cue and it fixes it. It's kind of like the whole thing of like, there's like some story about this, I don't know, like mechanic or something, and the car isn't running right, and he takes a hammer and he hits the spot. And the guy's like, why did I pay you, $60 to do this? And the guy's like, because I knew where to hit. Right, so if I'm a shitty coach, I'm going to give you 10 different cues and they won't work. I don't know which one to give you. If I'm a good coach, I look at you and I say, oh, one cue, this is the one you need, and I get it correct on the first try, right? And that's what it all comes down to. So, like I said, where I spend my time and energy is on the start position. It's on the setup. Only after a period of time where this person has been doing a lot of repetitions and they're making the same error, only at that point in time do I start making corrections. So when coaching novices and beginners, the best thing you can possibly do is teach them their start position, their setup, get it very, very consistent. Only at that point in time can you even start worrying about other things, because if your setup is different every time and your start position is different every time and you start out of position, there's no fixing it. Like you can't fix it like while you're in motion. That, like I said about at the very beginning about Ed Cohn, the moment he started his descent, he knew he was out of position. Well, yeah, you're not going to fix it. Now, you may fix it because it's only 45 pounds, right? But we want to drill that in while you're starting out so that your 45-pound start position is in the correct position every time. That way, when we have 500, 600 pounds on the bar, you've learned this start position to the point where you are always in the right position when you start. And so I think that that's probably the best and most effective way for you to coach It's say less, focus on start position, and then only after the athlete is making the same error every time, only at that point in time do you make a correction.